It's a worst nightmare come true. Just how big a catastrophe, whether it's sabotage or carelessness to blame for the bursting of the Russian-held Nova Khakova dam, the livelihoods of tens of thousands downstream have been washed away. Ever since last year's full-scale invasion, Kyiv and Moscow have accused each other of targeting the Soviet-built hydroelectric power station that found itself on the front line. Right now, there's no immediate threat to that bigger power station upstream. We're talking about Europe's largest nuclear power plant at Zaporizhzhia. But as Ukraine shows signs of engaging its long-anticipated counter-offensive, one wonders if Putin's playbook includes the scorched earth policy that served the Tsars and the Soviets in different times. We'll be assessing the damage and the danger, also asking about the options for Ukraine and its allies. Today in the France 24 debate, what next after the Ukraine dam burst? And joining us from Boston, Mariana Bujerin, Senior Research Associate at Harvard University's Project on Managing the Atom. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
From Washington, journalist David Satter, adjunct professor at Johns Hopkins University. Your latest book, Never Speak to Strangers, and Other Writings from Russia and the Soviet Union, you compile there. You're reporting from Moscow dating back to 1976. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
From Berlin's Sergei Sumleny, director and founder of the European Resilience Initiative Center Consultancy. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having invited me today.
And we welcome back journalist Vladislav Davidson, non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council think tank. Good evening.
Hi.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation you have on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. One day on, the water's still rising, rescuers racing to pull more residents to higher ground. France 24 correspondent Gulliver Cragg reports from the southern Kherson region.
This roundabout in Kherson is called Shipbuilders Square. Unexpectedly, it's become a hub of navigation. All sorts of vessels have been mobilized to bring residents of flooded areas to safety and relief.
My house is gone. Only the roof is visible. Just the roof.
The areas worst affected by the flooding are also those worst affected by shelling from the Russians across the river. People leaving now are people who had decided to stay put despite the risks.
I'm fed up. I was home, but now it's all flooded up to the second floor. Rocky, come here.
There are many pets among the evacuees, and other animals too.
I found him sitting in the stairway. I could hardly just leave him to drown. Yesterday evening our house was dry, but when we woke up this morning the water was a meter deep. So we waited for the evacuation, and they brought us here by boat.
Most evacuees say they plan to stay in the upper districts of Kherson, which are not under threat of flooding. But the whole city and beyond will be affected by this disaster for years, says Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister, touring the area.
The regions of Kherson, Mykolaiv and Dnipro will certainly already have problems with drinking water supplies. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of residents of our country who are already being affected by this. And now, with the governmental team and with the representatives of the military administrations, we are working to mitigate the effects of this catastrophe.
The waters will subside in a week, but Ukraine will be dealing with the aftermath for years.
Yeah, Vladislav Davidson, the images there of that dog at the end of Gulliver Cragg's report, just a reminder of the fact that this is a huge impact on humans and more than humans, the whole region, the landscape literally being redrawn.
My social media feed is full of dogs and cats being taken out of houses, of barns, out of little islands, little kittens in saucer pans, literally in cups and all sorts of stuff just floating away. It's really a disaster for animals as much as people, and oftentimes it's easier to care about animals than people, let's be honest. I'm sorry from Eastern Europe. I'm not saying those things.
Mariana Bujerin, this was something that both sides said the threat was high, accusing each other since last year of targeting this hydroelectric dam built in 1956. Your thoughts and your thoughts on what exactly happened?
Well, we don't know what exactly happened or who's to blame for it. Although if I had to put my money on and bet on the culprit, I would certainly think it would have been the Russian forces, which had reportedly mined the dam after having occupied it. And the Ukrainian authorities reportedly had prepared for this eventuality, especially at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. They had contingency planning for what would happen if the dam was taken out. But certainly the more immediate disaster, the more immediate danger is downstream with the flooding. Not only the towns and cities and people and animals that need to be evacuated by the widespread contamination and disruption that will be felt for years. We heard of hundreds of tons of machine oil being carried downstream. There are minefields are being swept in this flood. There's all sorts of chemicals that could get into the stream. Not only drinking water is disrupted, but also the supply of water for agriculture. There are reports that perhaps large swaths of Ukrainian agricultural lands down south could become, deserts. I don't know how much purchases to that. It's just, what the commentator said before. This will be years, if not decades, of mitigating the effects of these floods.
Sergei Sumleny, amid all the finger pointing, did this seem like something that was unavoidable to you?
Well, first, one needs to say that it is absolutely clear who is responsible for this destruction. It's Russia. There is absolutely no doubt that it were Russians who have blown it up. The Russians said they will do it. The Russian official,
so you think it was blown
channels
up?
Of the Russian military units. The Russian Telegram channels of Russian units cheer that. The Russians celebrate the fact that the Ukrainians are suffering. And the Russians told all the time they will do it. Moreover, they are threatening now to attack other dams on the Dnipro River. And it's very clear threats. It's not like some rumors. That's what they're writing. They will flush away the Ukrainian cities, they say.
So why would they?
Sergei,
why would it be in the interest of the Russians to blow up the dam? I realize that downstream it means that it makes it harder for an further incursion by Ukrainian forces. But you heard about the Deputy Prime Minister in that report raising the concerns about the drinking water. That's also going to affect Russian-held Crimea. There are Russians also people on the Russian side also being impacted. And
hello?
Can you hear us, Sergei?
Hello?
It's we seem to
yes,
have
I can
trouble
hear
with
you.
it.
Can you hear me?
And then
the reasons for the
why would they do it?
The reason for the Russians is very clear. First of all, but there's a minor reason. They want to make Ukrainian offensive more complicated, by flooding the river, by bringing massive water between the Ukrainian lines and the Russian lines. They want to make the offensive more complicated, to make the distance bigger that the Ukrainians need to cross. But first and foremost, they want to leave scorched earth when they retreat. Because the Russians, they clearly understand they're not stupid, they're not idiots. They understand they cannot stop the Ukrainian offensive. The Ukrainian army is more motivated, better equipped, and better prepared than the Russians. The Russians know they will retreat. So before they retreat, they want to make the Ukrainians' life really miserable. We need to understand, what does it mean, this flushing down all the water. The flood is the minor problem, the intoxicating of water, the flushing of the landmines. It is terrible, but that is a minor problem. The bigger problem will remain for years, and it will be the lack of drinking water in the area where 500,000 people are living. Kryvyi Rih, 200,000 people. Kherson, other regions. They will not have enough drinking water. Ukrainian agriculture, it is the main export reason for the Ukrainians. And it is totally dependent on the water from this water reservoir. It will just drain out. Ukrainian blooming landscapes in Kherson region, the breadbasket of Europe, will turn into desert for years. That is what the Russians do deliberately.
David Satter, you agree?
They know.
I think it's completely
possible.
Let me bring in David Satter on this. Go ahead, David.
It's completely possible, and it's absolutely consistent with Russian behavior. I haven't seen all of the scientific evidence, and prefer to just wait until all the information is available, but it doesn't seem to be coincidental that this took place just as Ukraine is launching their counteroffensive. And needless to say, this would be consistent with past Russian behavior, because after the destruction of the Kerch Bridge, they began attacking infrastructure in Kyiv and escalated steadily from there. So it's entirely possible, and if in fact it was carried out by the Russians, then we have to be prepared for as serious or even more serious acts of terror in the weeks and months to come.
I want to get to that point in a moment, David, but just on this issue about the timing, just as the counteroffensive is getting underway, yes, the areas downstream, some 300 kilometers to the sea, become flooded, but upstream, the river narrows. So is it really in Russia's interest?
Not necessarily, but we don't know how they are evaluating the situation on the ground. In some respects, it will stall a Ukrainian counteroffensive. In other regards, it'll make no difference at all. They have consistently underestimated the Ukrainians and misjudged them militarily. So we can't say that just because it makes no sense to a rational person, that it therefore would make no sense to the Russians, because Russia's in a lot of ways not a rational country, and their calculations are oftentimes very surprising.
Not a rational country, Vladislav Davidson, or is it just a different rationale?
This is an ancient question that is best directed towards people like Solovyov and Dostoevsky, not to me and my friend David. I mean, there's a completely different civilizational thinking and a completely different civilizational cost-benefit analysis. I mean, there is a cost-benefit analysis, but there's kind of this brutal viciousness that this act shows. And is that rational? Is it rational to be that vicious in the middle of a war? I don't know. I mean, they didn't even evacuate their own soldiers from around the dam. They obviously lost some of their equipment and some of their BMPs.
Which again could point to just incompetence. We saw that a lot of the geologists talking about the fact that the levels at the dam were very low during the winter months and now suddenly very high. So did they just mismanage the dam?
I mean, Russia, the Soviet Union had a history of technological superiority coupled with tremendous hubris and not being able to keep things from blowing up, or keeping ships from going down, happen all the time. So you can't account for that. It's hard to say whether this is a complete dereliction of their duty or terrorism. I think the timing just really points to the fact that this is terrorism. I would put my money on that, not incompetence, to be honest.
Mariana Bujarin, is it timing you're looking at or history when you think of this?
Well, both. I mean, I think it's surprising that we are still surprised when Russia does something like this. We watched Russian troops amass around Ukrainian borders for a year and a half, and we were surprised when it invaded. We're surprised in Bucha and Irpin and Izum at horrific war crimes, and we're now still surprised that Russia would blow up the dam. I think we need to accept that, certain things Russians are prepared to do, even at a really great cost to themselves. There's just really very little restraint, not in international law, not in terms of bearing really high costs to themselves. There's, as David said, there's a certain viciousness and spitefulness, and just kind of, damage for its own sake, violence not as a means to achieving an end, a political end in this war,
Mariana,
but for its own sake.
I'm proceeding with caution because you remember when there was the Nord Stream gas pipes explosions in the North Sea. The initial reaction of many was to point the finger at Moscow, and now more and more evidence is coming out that it wasn't Russia to blame. So you spoke with caution at the outset. That's why I'm asking these questions.
I mean, there's also evidence that's coming out about Nord Stream 2 that's pointing right back to Russia. I think we've come a full circle, although I might not have seen the latest on that. I just, with the timing and with the prior record, again, we have to wait for a full investigation. We, of course, have to rely on what we know, and there's a lot that we don't know. I just don't see how this could be anyone else that would cause this kind of disaster.
David Satter mentioning earlier how it's a no-holds-bar attitude by Moscow and warning of the dangers to come. And, of course, the danger that came to everybody's mind on Tuesday was that of the Russian-held Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. No immediate threat, says the UN's nuclear watchdog. Still, even though it's got that separate reservoir for cooling the reactor, local authorities this Wednesday on the Ukrainian side of the Zaporizhzhia plant carrying out disaster preparedness drills. After the dam burst, the dangers abound both up and down the Dnipro River. Jenny Shin has more.
The Nova Khakova Dam in southern Ukraine lies some 30 kilometers east of Kherson. It crosses Ukraine's mighty Dnipro River and held 18 cubic kilometers of water within its 30-meter wall. Its destruction spells out huge consequences for the wider region, starting with towns downstream. Water levels are set to continue to rise for the next 3 to 10 days. Thousands of wild animals have died, and hundreds of thousands of residents remain trapped without normal access to drinking water, with risk of contamination. The breach is an ecological catastrophe with far-reaching consequences for the environment, notably for the marine life that depends on the reservoir. This video, posted by a Ukrainian official, claims to show stranded fish in the Dnipro floodwaters. In addition to the flooding, Kyiv says at least 150 tons of oil has been spilled into the river, causing an estimated 50 million euros of damage. Also at risk is Crimea's canal irrigation system. The North Crimea Canal delivers water to Crimea from the Dnipro River and accounts for some 80% of Crimea's water. The dam's destruction could wreck the system of canals, threatening 120,000 hectares of crops which rely on irrigation. Further upstream lies the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant. Water from the reservoir behind the Nova Khakova Dam is needed for the plant's cooling systems. The International Atomic Energy Agency says it's monitoring the situation, but that there are no immediate safety risks.
Some of the water from that dam was already helping to cool, until now, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant. David Satter, a hydroelectric dam is one thing. A nuclear plant is another. Isn't that, as they said during the Cold War, mutually assured destruction if there's a meltdown there?
I would think so. I would think so, especially if the Russians have forces stationed nearby. They wouldn't necessarily respond against the nuclear power plant. They have other There are no shortage of other things they can do, including terror bombings of civilian areas. The psychology was actually, it's a good time now to remember what happened with the nuclear submarine Kursk. You may recall that it sank in the year 2000 in the Barents Sea, and the Russian submariners were trapped and alive in the submarine and signaling and calling for help for a considerable period of time before their calls for help ceased. And during that period, the Russians refused to accept the help of British and Norwegian vessels which were equipped to rescue submarines in that kind of situation. And when Putin was asked about it, his reaction in an interview with Larry King on CNN in the U.S., his reaction was very, very indicative. He kind of smirked and said, "Well, they drowned." In other words, he had not the slightest concern for the lives of those sailors, and their fate riveted the whole world at that time. Now, that was more than 20 years ago, but the same psychology is at work. So therefore, and they've committed many crimes since then, but they're capable of wasting the lives of their soldiers, and needless to say, the lives of Ukrainian soldiers and civilians, virtually without limit, and they won't be restrained by moral criteria or by moral considerations. It's quite another thing if they feel it would be in their interest. And for the moment, what doesn't seem to me that they have an interest in causing an explosion at a nuclear power plant in territory where they are presently located. But anything is possible with them.
Sergei Sumleny, we remember at the opening days of the all-out invasion of Ukraine last year, the storming of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. If Ukraine's to take it back, logic would have it that they would try to encircle it. Do you share David Satter's view that they won't allow a meltdown necessarily?
Well, first of all, we need to say that the Russians don't care about people who they claim to be Russian citizens. The Russians don't believe they to be the Russian citizens. Even if they would have believed that they are the Russian citizens, the Russians don't care about their own citizens too. The Russians have killed 200,000 their own soldiers in Ukraine, and they don't care. The Russians led their soldiers to dig into highly contaminated area around the Chernobyl power plant in early weeks of the invasion, making them contaminated and severely ill. They didn't care. So if they will believe that blowing up the Zaporizhzhia power plant will bring them some advantage, strategically, they will do it without any hesitance. And we need to understand that what the Russians do now, they are imposing to Ukraine multi-billion harm for the years. Why? Because they know they will have to retreat from Ukraine. So retreating from Ukraine, they want to leave as much damage as possible to make Ukraine weaker for years. Because in 5 years, in 10 years, the Russians plan to rebuild their army and attack again. That is their only purpose. Otherwise, it's a competition. But that is the Russian purpose. They want to crush Ukraine forever. They didn't manage to do it in 2014. In 2022, they want to do it further. And one last thing.
Sure.
I don't know, where have you got the idea that the Russians did not stand behind Nord Stream 2? Nord Stream 2 explosion was clearly addressed to Russia. We have all the evidence that the Russians did it. Otherwise, it is fake news. We know that the Russian scientific vessel with submarines was cruising around this area for weeks.
What the Washington Post reported this week was fake news?
Just fake news. What you're saying is just fake news. Yes, it was fake news. This report came from one guy who believed that Ukrainians are so stupid that they send their agents to rent a yacht by a Ukrainian agent in Baltic Sea to like blow it up. It was debunked completely debunked. And now we know that the Dutch military authority like photographed and located the Russian military vessel, which had only one purpose, to have submarines for underwater sabotage activities, cruising around the place of explosion for several days before the explosion. And Russia was the only country which had interest for that, because they wanted to blackmail Germany with high gas prices, and they didn't want to like to go out of the contract. They stopped the delivery of gas all the times with allegedly like lies. They said, that they didn't have like some compressor, some turbine, etc. And then they blowed it up, remaining one single line left, one single Nord Stream 2 line, to let it be evoked of the sanctions. That is the Russian interest, and that's what they do. They like killed MH17. They killed Skripal. They tried to kill Skripal. They killed Litvinenko. All the time they denied, and all the time journalists like you, said we don't know, because the Kremlin says, of course we know. Of course we know. Don't try to play this fake objectivity. It's not fake. It is playing into the Kremlin hands. Thank you.
Mariana Bujarin, I mean, we could prosecute what happened in the North Sea, in the Baltic Sea, for the rest of the hour. But I really want to get back to the issue to hand. How does Ukraine now go about its counteroffensive in that area?
I actually don't have a very good answer to that question. I mean,
We seem to have lost the connection there with Mariana. The Skype gods are not with us at this particular moment. We'll try to reconnect as quick as possible. Ukraine, which claims, by the way, that the flooding does not impact its counter-offensive, but the map shows how, barring a daring amphibious attack, the front's been instantly reduced by some 300 kilometers, if we look at Vladislav Davidson at that map. Again, when you look at the map, how does Ukraine go about it now, particularly around Zaporizhzhia, and particularly with the panel unanimous that Russia's not beyond allowing some kind of a meltdown at the nuclear plant?
Nuclear saber rattling is something that the Americans and the Chinese and the Indians are taking very seriously. We have information that the Chinese are really putting a lot of effort behind closed doors and telling the Russians absolutely not. The Indians aren't happy about a precedent like that. The Americans, I don't know what the threat is. As an American citizen, I hope there is a very serious threat being made to the Russian command staff on what happens if a nuclear tactical weapon is used, if nuclear terrorism takes place on European and Ukrainian territory.
Allowing a meltdown at the power plant is part of that.
Yeah, it's terrorism. I mean, whoever's making those kinds of threats, from the National Security Council or the DOD in Washington, obviously has that under the remit of the kinds of things that count as nuclear saber rattling or nuclear terrorism. So that is a very serious issue. I've been told by people who talk to people, although I can't corroborate this, is that there is background conversation now, debate now, dialogue now, back-channel dialogue on trying to get an international mission, UN or UN Vienna Watchdog, whoever, to come in and take care of it. This is what the Ukrainians actually wanted with a dam as quickly as much.
There are observers of the International Energy Agency, Atomic Energy Agency, in at Zaporizhzhia.
There are, but it's not under their control. There is a conversation now taking place, as far as I know, on handing it over so that there won't be any nuclear explosion. Actually, is not good for anybody. I mean, if I was Putin, I would think, Zaporozhye is already under their law, annexed Russian territory and all that. Why irradiate your own territory? I mean, it's not great to have nuclear explosion not that far from Rostov, from St. Petersburg. They're going to catch some radiation if they do this, right?
All right, we have the connection back with Boston. Mariana Bujarin, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, apologies for that. So I just like to bring in a thought that it actually wouldn't be that easy for the Russians to cause a meltdown, the kind of disaster that actually would send radioactive fumes to Rostov Oblast and elsewhere. What they can do, they can certainly cause a widespread kind of disruption and contamination locally, which is even, a more dangerous thing in the way because, they could shelter their own territory, but say, they spend fuel pools or something like that, they could drain those and just set those either on fire or explode them. That would not cause stuff to go up in the atmosphere in the way that Chernobyl blew up, but that would cause water contamination and immediate damage to the area. That is not, again, beyond the pale of the possible. We know that there are reports that at least 3 of the 6 reactor units at Zaporizhzhia have been mined. Again, mining them will not cause sort of a major disruption or destruction, I should say, or kind of major nuclear event, but it would cause major disruption and it would leave Ukrainians with this really precarious asset and a facility on their hands that might, they might hope it would slow down their advances.
And so how does Ukraine try to reconquer Zaporizhzhia's nuclear power plant then? How do they go about it?
Oh, that's a very good question to which I don't have an answer. I know that there are negotiations sort of quietly going on the background in which the IEA is one of the parties. There might be a way that the Russians would agree to hand over the station as they're retreating for a certain price, and what that price might be is unclear. I mean, at this point, really, it's a wasting asset. The Russians are not using it, and nor do they actually need it. They don't need electricity from this plant. They have, just as much of an overbuilt capacity for electricity generation as Ukraine has. So they can't use it. It's not connected to the grid. It's just 6 reactor units chock full of nuclear fuel that are sitting there. But one thing we have to keep in mind, that Russia here is not a unitary actor. There are all sorts of groups at this nuclear power plant. There's Russian military, there's Rosgvardia, there's FSB, the security services, and there's Rosatom. And each one of them do have different lines of command. They have different interests. So, for instance, when even the passage of the IEA monitoring missions was carried out and the negotiations about that, you have to actually align all of these sides on the Russian side as well to get all of their buy-in and all of their permissions, right? And the military might have a different view on these things than, say, people from Rosatom. So,
Mariana, are you
suggesting
here that this isn't just Vladimir Putin who's got a team of rivals around him? This is the man at the top who doesn't quite control his chain of command?
I mean, he controls it to the extent, is possible to control for a single person. But there's a lot of battlefield kind of horse trading that might be going on at the same time. I mean, we've seen these things play out in Bakhmut. You have the Wagner group that's, kind of going head to head with the Minister of Defense and the Chief of General Staff. I mean, there's all sorts of kind of internal things going on in Russia that we're not exactly aware of. And certainly we know for a fact that at the Zaporizhzhia, there's many groups at play, and all of them have to be aligned and talked to and negotiated with in order for something to happen.
David Satter, to people, again, we're looking at this through Western eyes here. To us, this seems incredible, that it seems like chaos. But Russians, do they just take it in stride that, yeah, there are these competing different groups with arms?
Well, I mean, it's very risky to try to explain what is happening in Russia internally. especially when we're talking about the leadership. The war situation may have given some latitude for disagreements, particularly since it's not going well. But to extrapolate from that, who is in charge and whether Putin can work with those factions, those leaders who've been criticizing him, whether in fact they are working together or not. It's important to remember that for Putin, there's a certain advantage in having people on his extreme nationalist right screaming for more decisive and more brutal action, because it creates the impression internationally that he is relatively moderate, and it predisposes those countries that are supplying Ukraine with arms to listen to what the official Russian government is saying and perhaps be influenced by it. That's something very important to keep in mind. In reality, we don't know, and we don't know the answer to the most important question, which is what is the state of morale of the frontline troops? Are they near? Is morale near collapse? During the first Chechen war, there was a moment was reached, and in which there was a real danger of an armed mutiny. General Alexander Lebed at the time said 30% of the troops in Chechnya are ready to turn their guns against the people who sent them here, and 10% are thinking about it. Now, is that the case in Ukraine? We don't know, but it could be, because there are many people who've just been mobilized from civilian life and thrown into what is in fact an inferno, with poor leadership and no regard for their survival. So I would think that it pays to be cautious about the conclusions we draw. I'm afraid that events will be the best judge of who is opposed to this war, what the ability of Russia is to continue waging it. But clearly, all the objective indicators are that Russia is in no condition to withstand a highly motivated counteroffensive.
Except for bar one thing, which is that they don't have right now, the Ukrainians to take back areas that are mined and where there are trenches. Sergei Sumleni, they'll need airplanes, and that's what they're asking for, at least on his website. Ukraine's president talking up the delivery of U.S.-made F-16s fighter jets by Western allies. He put out a statement in which he said, "I've already received an understanding of the number from some of our European partners. It is a serious, powerful offer." Your thoughts on that statement?
Well, we know that the Ukrainians.
Sergei Sumleni.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. We know that the Ukrainians, they have perfectly mastered every weapon we deliver them. And before we send to Ukraine any type of weapon, we got all the terrible warnings from Russia, like, don't do this will be red line, we will retaliate with nukes. We know that Javelin were the red line. Then we remember the interview by German Chancellor Scholz, as he said why he doesn't send IFVs and tanks to Ukraine, because he said the Russians will retaliate with nukes. We know nothing happened. Nothing happened when the Ukrainians sank the battleship Moskva. Nothing happened when we sent tanks, artillery, missiles, HIMARS. The Ukrainians hit the Crimea territory, like air bases in Crimea. The Ukrainians hit the Russian air bases, strategic aviation in Angles, etc. Nothing happened. The Russians said they will attack us when we accept Finland and Sweden into NATO. Nothing happened. So actually, the fear of not sending F-16 to Ukraine is absolutely artificial. It is actually the fear of doing something, preferring the terrible reality to something we don't know. But if we come to the situation not emotionally, but clear billions with their weapons. They always have like a halt to promise they give us. They said not to attack Russian territory. They have never attacked it with all Western weapons, and they need weapons now. We know that as fast
the connection's breaking up a little bit, Sergei.
All the weapons the Ukrainians have now, and no butcher would have happened.
Right. So the weapons are coming. Yeah, now we can hear you better. But I'm going to turn to Vladislav Davidson on this. The weapons are coming. There's, on the one hand, how equipped Ukraine is. On the other, and we heard from David Satter, how low morale might be among the enemy.
Yeah.
At this critical juncture. Your thoughts?
First of all, the morale on the Russian side. Like, I haven't operated on the Russian side because I can't, obviously. So, I mean, I can't talk to Russian troops. I can talk to Ukrainian troops. So I don't really know. But we do have Telegram channels. We have their Facebook posts. We have all sorts of information. They're desperate. They're desperately unhappy. They're taking massive casualties. They're being sent in so-called Zerg zombie rushes into Ukrainian guns. It must be terrible to be a conscripted Russian soldier with no food and no medicine, no body armor, no training, a horrible captain who's being really sadistic to him, no air force control, bad command and control, et cetera, et cetera. It must be horrible. I wouldn't want to be there. It's hell on earth. And those guys are dying by the tens of thousands, and the ones that aren't dying are going to come back to Russia with post-traumatic stress disorder and are going to cause problems all over Russia. So, obviously, Sergei, who I haven't seen since the war started, I'd like to see him again, is correct on that. The Russians do have a manpower advantage. They mobilized enough Russian men.
Yeah, there's this feeling that time is on Vladimir Putin's side, that if this counteroffensive peters out, then and we go towards another winter, and it's a...
And then the American elections. I mean, he's going to grind it out. He has no incentive whatsoever not to just let this go. In fact, his only strategy now is to just keep this going as long as possible and wait for the Europeans to get tired, Ukraine fatigue to set in, the Ukrainians to lose cohesion, to run out of manpower. The Russians, basically, their one thing that they have is 3.5 times more men and the kind of brutality to send them into the face of death that actually does get results. It's not humane, but it does get results. And the Ukrainians need to, as they say, return on investment to the Europeans and to the Americans for all these guns and all these weapons, all these Leopard tanks that we've sent them. So if we don't see something substantive, by we, I mean Washington, D.C., there are going to be voices calling for negotiations and not on Ukraine's terms.
This catastrophe that happened in southern Ukraine triggering a fresh wave of international sympathy for Ukraine. In the last minutes, France's president announcing that his country is sending aid to respond to the immediate needs of Ukraine in the face of the flooding triggered by the bursting of this dam. Mariana Bujarin, how far will international sympathy get you when we've spent the whole hour basically saying that Vladimir Putin doesn't care?
Well, I have to say, I just actually returned from Ukraine. I spent some time in Kiev and in Lviv, and the morale there really is extremely high. There is a determination, there's an understanding that for Ukraine, it's an existential fight. And also there's a big feeling of gratitude towards the Western partners. And yes, even if, the armaments are not coming at the pace that we would like, and ultimately it's costing Ukrainian lives, there's still an understanding that the Western partners and the Western solidarity is really essential to keeping this fight going and to stacking the deck in the Ukrainian favor. So I think this not just sympathy, but a very kind of actionable solidarity, both in terms of humanitarian aid, in terms of financial support, and in terms of military support, basically shows that kind of these partnerships and alliances, that's essentially what wins wars. That's what helps you survive, not the force of arms and nuclear weapons.
We'll have to leave it there for now. Mariana Bujera, many thanks for joining us from Boston. David Satter in Washington. Sergei Sumleni in Berlin. Vladislav Davidson, thank you for being with us here in the France 24 Today.